Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into an era that was more fragrant than a Yankee candle store that's been set on fire. We're talking about Victorian England. But before you go breathing in too deeply, I have to give you a warning. The scent that was wafting through those streets, it wasn't exactly lavender and bergamot. Tonight, we are diving nose first into the underarm of history to answer a question you never even knew you had. Why did Victorian women smell so unforgettable? We are talking about a time long before deodorant, before daily showers, or even the basic decency of someone politely asking to please crack a window. So before you settle in, maybe take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as you possibly can. But let's just pause for a second. Have you ever actually wondered how women survived a summer in wool dresses, corsets, and a 6-pound hairpiece with absolutely no air conditioning? Did anyone ever try to freeze a crinoline? How many days could you really go without a bath before your own cat started to judge you? Were floral perfumes just a cover-up? Or did they mix with body odor to create some kind of odor regret? Would you survive a Victorian dinner party? Or would you quietly expire under a mountain of unwashed lace? Could love truly flourish if you smelled like you'd just lost a fight with a wheel of cheese? Congratulations! You have just woken up in London in the year 1853. You're a Victorian woman. You own 2 dresses, 0 deodorant, and enough social anxiety to power a steam engine. The good news is you're alive. The bad news is so are your armpits. You wake up in a small, stuffy bedroom that's layered with the scent of old furniture and last night's boiled cabbage. Personal hygiene is less of a ritual and more of an afterthought. Your morning wash consists of splashing some tepid water on your face and then pretending that rubbing your wrists with a bit of rose water counts as a full-body cleanse. The real question here is it better to wake up smelling like last night's stew or yesterday's sweat? It's early morning, but the air in the room is already thick. Your window, if you're lucky enough to even have one, is painted shut for most of the year. This was less for privacy and more for keeping out London's infamous fresh air, which was a mix of red fog and horse emissions. The quilt on your bed is heavy, it's musty, and let's be honest, it probably hasn't seen a good wash since Victoria's first Jubilee. You slept in your underthings, which are really just yesterday's chemise, now doing double duty as both pajamas and daywear. As you peel yourself out of bed, you're greeted by a familiar symphony of smells. Cabbage dust, wood polish, and this faint undercurrent of vide. Not your feet specifically, just, vide. There is no such thing as morning breath, because breath is just perpetually morning, afternoon, and evening. Your mouth tastes like you slept with a wool sock wedged between your teeth. And who knows, maybe you did. Dental hygiene is somewhere below dusting the coal scuttle on your list of daily ambitions. Toothpaste does exist, but it's made of more chalk and crushed oyster shells than anything minty fresh. You consider a quick rinse with some cold water, but you decide that's a task for fancy people. Instead, you chew on a stick of licorice root, and you just hope for the best. Kissing before breakfast. Not unless you're prepared to duel with a halitosis saber. Now about that wash. Bathing, as in a full body, all in the water immersion, is reserved for birthdays, doctor's orders, and very, very special house guests. Instead, you fetch the ewer, which is a jug of water that was left out overnight and is now so cold it feels like a punishment for a crime you don't even remember committing. You dunk a corner of a towel in. You dab at your face, behind your ears, and maybe, just maybe, a swift swipe to the underarms. The water is gray by the time you're done. The towel is also gray, but hey, nobody's judging. Soap is a luxury, and it smells faintly of ash and animal fat. You keep it in a little tin to stop the mice from eating it. Most days, you just make do with a dab of rose water or lavender water, more to keep up appearances than to actually remove any dirt. You splash a little on your wrists, a little behind your ears, and if you're feeling particularly extravagant, you dab a bit on your handkerchief so you can discreetly sniff it during moments of social peril. If only masking body odor were as easy as mooting yourself on a Zoom call. Your hair, which was so artfully arranged last night, is now a minor disaster. You take your boar bristle brush and you give it the requisite 100 strokes, which is supposedly to add shine and improve its health. In reality, you're just moving yesterday's hair oil around and maybe dislodging a stray breadcrumb or two. Shampoo exists, but it's more of an abstract concept, usually involving eggs, gin, or the brave application of cold rainwater. All of which sound suspiciously like a dare. As you get dressed, you realize you have two choices. The dress that smells like Sunday's dinner, or the one that smells like last month's cheese. You opt for whichever one is less likely to draw a comment at the breakfast table. Undergarments are quickly shaken out and declared good enough. Clean is relative after all. And that's really the thing. In Victorian England, nobody truly expects you to smell good. The goal is just to smell less bad than everyone else. If you are particularly motivated, you might pin a sachet of dried lavender or clove to your bodice, an early attempt at personal air freshening. Otherwise, you simply lower your standards, you raise your chin, and you face the day. So as you finally shuffle out of your tiny bedroom, hair brushed, face sort of washed, dressed in your least alarming frock, just remember, in the morning routine of a Victorian woman, victory isn't a fresh start. It is simply emerging slightly less pungent than the wallpaper. And honestly, that's enough. Victorian fashion demanded a full suit of armor. We're talking petticoats, a chemise, corsets, bustles, and at least 3 layers of wool, even in July. Imagine wrapping yourself in a wet blanket, adding a dash of anxiety, and then sealing it all in with a buttoned-up collar. Airflow. Not a chance. Every single garment was just a new opportunity for bacteria to flourish. So let's set the scene. You, a respectable Victorian woman, start your day staring into a wooden wardrobe where your choices are limited to two equally tragic options: yesterday's dress or the slightly less wrinkled special occasion gown. Forget about color coordinating. Your main concern is which one can stand up on its own from accumulated grime. The phrase outfit repeater doesn't even begin to capture the reality of this. You and your dress are locked in a multi-week, codependent relationship. At some point, it becomes hard to tell who is supporting whom. First comes the chemise, your one thin barrier between your skin and society. If it's made of cotton, you're high class. If it's linen, you're doing just fine. If it's something rougher, well, you just develop character and calluses in all the wrong places. The chemise is, in theory, washable. But this happens about as often as a solar eclipse. After all, scrubbing out last week's sweat stains is a full-body workout that Victorian etiquette books kindly refer to as robust exercise. On top of that, you slide on the corset, laced up so tight that you're genuinely surprised every single time you inhale. The goal is a wasp waist, but what you get is a gentle reminder that your ribs are, in fact, bendable. Some women would claim they could faint at will. Others just passed out from the compression. Every sigh, you make sounds like a kettle that's about to boil over. The corset leaves these deep impressions in your skin and even deeper regrets in your soul. Breathing is overrated anyway. Then come the petticoats. Not one, not two, but sometimes as many as 5. Each layer promises volume, but only delivers heat and the sensation that you are constantly being followed by your own laundry pile. Some petticoats are starched so stiff, you could probably use them as emergency shelter in a downpour. Others are just wool, heavy, itchy, and always a little bit damp, no matter how long they've been hanging. Your thighs feel like 2 hamsters fighting inside a woolen sack. Now you have to add the crinoline, a contraption best described as a portable bird cage for your legs. Metal hoops and starched horsehair work together to make every doorway a potential hazard. You shuffle sideways through life, forever calculating angles. Your cat just stares at you in terror. You knock over at least 1 candlestick a week, and you take out your own tea tray twice a month. Fashion is pain, but also apparently a contact sport. The outer skirts, bodices, and overskirts come next. Usually wool, sometimes silk if you're showing off, but always heavy enough to make you long for a career as a nudist. The bodice buttons up to your throat and all the way down to your wrists. Necklines are high enough to double as a face mask. Sleeves are snug, restricting all but the daintiest of arm movements. Every time you raise your hand, it feels like your shoulder is signing up for military service. And now you must accessorize. Gloves always, even indoors, because heaven forbid anyone sees your scandalous, unwashed fingers. Stockings are pulled up and held in place with garters so tight they leave permanent tattoos on your skin. Boots or lace-up shoes, as stiff as plywood, are squeezed onto feet that haven't seen the light of day since Easter. You add a shawl or a mantle if it's chilly. And don't forget the hat, weighted down with ribbons, feathers, and the occasional dead bird. It was taxidermy chic, darling. As you finally wobble out the door, you realize your dress weighs more than a toddler and has roughly the same hygiene standards. Air circulation is purely theoretical. Under your skirts, the conditions are subtropical. The layers act as an incubator for every single odor, and you become a walking greenhouse. Still, you nod politely and glide down the street, silently praying you don't have to run for the omnibus. And when someone comments, "My, you look radiant today," what they really mean is, "I hope I'm upwind." This was the Victorian dress code. Equal parts dignity, discomfort, and damp wool. If you made it through the day without passing out or tripping over your own crinoline, you weren't just dressed, you were victorious. Strap in. Literally. Your corset is made of whalebone, and it's cinched so tight that taking a deep breath is an Olympic event. Forget about sweating discreetly. All of that trapped moisture becomes your constant, musky companion. Every time you sigh in frustration, the air around you grows slightly more humid. Let's just take a moment to appreciate the marvel that is the Victorian corset. It was a garment engineered for one main purpose: the pursuit of the ideal waist. In theory, a well-fitted corset was supposed to give you poise, confidence, and the enviable hourglass figure of a Grecian statue. In practice, it was like trying to live your life inside a decorative mailbox. The ritual would begin each morning as your lady's maid, or if you were less fortunate, your nearest available sister started the slow, deliberate lacing process. She'd pull the strings with the enthusiasm of someone tightening a cargo ship's moorings, while you clutched the bedpost and made promises to every saint you could remember. As the corset tightened, your internal organs would make their annual migration upward, downward, or just simply out of the way. Your stomach, your liver, your lungs, all were gently but firmly relocated to maximize that coveted 18-inch waist. Rumor has it that Queen Victoria herself managed a 22-inch circumference, but only after giving up the idea of ever sitting down again. For the rest of us, we just had to settle for whatever measurement kept us conscious through breakfast. Sitting, by the way, was its own negotiation. The corset demanded that you perch, not lounge. Your spine was perfectly straight, shoulders back, chin up, your posture so good you could balance a tray of scones on your head. But heaven help you if you needed to bend over. Dropping a handkerchief meant making a choice. Do you squat and risk the structural integrity of your petticoats, or do you attempt the awkward side bend move, which Victorian etiquette books never mention, but everyone secretly practices? Of course, breathing became an adventure. Forget taking a deep, satisfying inhale. Your lungs now worked on a subscription model. 3 shallow breaths per side, with a free wheeze for every exhale. Climbing a flight of stairs was now classified as light cardio. Getting too animated in a conversation Big mistake. You might find yourself lightheaded, your vision swimming, and forced to excuse yourself with the classic feminine vapors, which is just Victorian for, I can't feel my feet. Fainting was so common that fainting couches were a legitimate piece of furniture. You can think of them as the Victorian version of a panic room, but for your circulation. And let's not forget the sweat. A tightly laced corset worn under layers of linen, wool, and silk trapped heat with the efficiency of a slow cooker. Every movement squeezed perspiration into places that no sunlight has ever reached. By noon, you've become a human humidifier, discreetly dabbing at your temples with a lace handkerchief and praying that the perfume on your wrists holds out. By evening, your chemise is basically welded to your skin, and you're one false move away from an embarrassing squelch. And if you thought corsets only affected you, think again. A corset restricts your appetite, so lunch becomes more of a suggestion than an actual meal. Bites are nibbled, sips are tiny, and if someone suggests just one more tart, you know you're going to be silently negotiating space with your own rib cage. Dinner parties were less about socializing and more about not passing out face first into the blancmange. Still, society said you were supposed to be delicate, ethereal, and untroubled by such mortal concerns as breathing or digestion. If you complained, you were told that beauty is sacrifice and that tight lacing shows discipline. But nobody mentions that discipline mostly involves not screaming, while someone yanks your laces even tighter. So you stand there, you smile, and you exist as a monument to Victorian engineering, upright, cinched, and smelling faintly of effort. All for a waist measurement that fits somewhere between a family Bible and a well-fed cat. At the end of the day, you'd peel off the corset with the weary relief of a knight doffing his armor after a battle. Your ribs would sigh. Your stomach would resume its natural shape. And for a brief, glorious moment, you could actually breathe. But tomorrow, it all starts again. Beauty, after all, is only one laced rib away. Laundry was a Herculean task that involved boiling cauldrons, lye soap that would eat through your skin, and hours upon hours of scrubbing. So naturally, you did it as rarely as possible. Most of your undergarments just got aired out by hanging them in a drafty hallway, because actually washing them meant risking the structural integrity of your only chemise. Let's just start with the reality of it all. In Victorian England, laundry was a full-day, multi-person event that was scheduled with the same seriousness as a royal visit. You might think modern laundry is tedious, sorting socks, dodging lost coins, fishing for stray tissues, but try it Victorian style, and you'll have a whole new appreciation for your washing machine. There are no magical buttons, no quick wash settings, and definitely no gentle spin cycle. The only things spinning are your arms, and by noon, they feel like you've just wrestled a stubborn ox. First comes the gathering. Everything that even thinks about being washed is rounded up. Chemises, petticoats, stockings, and occasionally a dress if it's had a run-in with gravy or the family cat. But don't expect a full wardrobe rotation. Clothes were precious, fabric was expensive, and frequent washing would shorten a garment's lifespan. Spot cleaning was just a polite way of saying you scrub the stain and hope for the best. Next up was the soaking. A giant tub, think of a bathtub for trolls, would be filled with water heated over the kitchen range. This required servants, or for the middle classes, some very determined relatives to haul endless buckets from the well or the pump. Hot water wasn't just a luxury, it was an achievement. Your laundry room was the kitchen. Your hands were the agitator. And your hopes for dry skin were nothing but a distant memory. Soap was another story altogether. Victorian soap was like a homemade science experiment. Equal parts animal fat, lye, and the haunting suspicion that it might just dissolve your fingerprints. It was yellow, crumbly, and about as gentle as sandpaper. Laundry day was basically an exfoliation ritual you never asked for. And bleach. It was simply old urine. No, really. Saved in buckets and added for that extra clean result. Suddenly, a spring fresh scent sounds like something from a fantasy novel. Scrubbing was the main event. Garments were slapped onto washboards and attacked with the ferocity of someone fighting for their life. It was elbow grease or nothing. And Victorian stains were legendary. Ink, mud, sweat, gravy, mystery blotches. You had to scrub until the fabric gave up, or you did. If you were lucky, there was a mangle, which was a set of hand-cranked rollers to squeeze out the water, and if you weren't careful, your fingers. Rinsing came next. If you think a rinse means removing all the soap, you need to think again. It was usually just a hurried dunk in cold water before wringing everything out by hand. If your dress was white at the start of the year, it would be beige by autumn. If it was colored, it would fade to a shade best described as Victorian sadness. Drying, that was an adventure all its own. Undergarments and stockings were hung over a line in the garden, or if it was raining, which it always was, over chairs by the kitchen fire. Everything would dry stiff, scratchy, and suspiciously warped. Your best hope was that nothing blew away or got borrowed by a passing neighbor. That chemise might never be seen again. And then there was the ironing. Yes, after all of that, someone had to iron the creases out of every last petticoat and sleeve. The iron was a solid brick of metal heated over the fire until you could smell singed wool from 3 rooms away. Every iron came with the thrill of possibly burning a hole straight through your only presentable dress. Laundry day would end with everything mostly clean, vaguely dry, and a kitchen that smelled like boiling socks and burnt soap. You'd collapse, your arms aching, your hands raw, and you'd swear to wear your undergarments just one more day, maybe 2, before braving it all again. In the Victorian world, cleanliness wasn't next to godliness. It was next to impossible. So the next time someone complains about their laundry mountain, just remember, at least your pile never tried to take your fingerprints. Your hair was your crowning glory. Or more accurately, your oily tiara. You might brush it 100 times, but you would rarely wash it. Dry shampoo. That was just flour and some wishful thinking. If your hair got really out of control, you might rub in a little goose fat or some pomade, then sprinkle it with scented powder. Voila! Instant Victorian volume and seagull attraction. Let's start at the roots, quite literally. Victorian hair care was built on the philosophy of do less and hope for the best. You'd begin your morning at the vanity, facing a mop of hair that had spent the night twisted in a plait or wound up in rags for curls. You would remove the pins, unroll your tresses, and survey the results. If your hair had a sheen to it, congratulations. It wasn't health. It was last week's natural oils, and possibly a trace of last night's mutton stew. Washing your hair in the modern sense was rare and a little bit scandalous. Maybe every few weeks if you were feeling especially decadent, or if your scalp started to resemble a candle. Hot water was precious, soap was harsh, and shampoo as we know it simply didn't exist. Recipes for a hair wash often included things like eggs, brandy, or a splash of rainwater collected in a pan that was left out during the one sunny day in May. The resulting mixture was more breakfast than beauty product. For the most part, you just embraced your natural oils. Victorian beauty magazines insisted that frequent washing weakened the hair and encouraged colds. Instead, you had to rely on brushing, 100 strokes a day minimum, with a boar bristle brush that did double duty as a scalp massage and a workout for your triceps. The goal was to distribute oil from the roots to the tips, giving your hair a glossy shine. In practice, it just meant that the brush picked up everything. Dust, dandruff, stray bits of hay, and at least one secret crumb. Then came the goose fat. That is not a typo. Goose fat, bear grease, and various pomades were all considered essential for that glossy look. If you couldn't afford animal fats, you might use olive oil, which at least left you smelling like an optimistic salad. Once it was applied, you'd twist and braid your hair into intricate shapes, pinning it with metal hairpins and combs. Your updo would hold firm, possibly forever, or at least until the next laundry day. Dry shampoo was a fever dream, but Victorian women invented their own solutions. Flour, rice powder, and even cornstarch were dusted on the roots to absorb grease and give the hair a fashionable, powdery finish. The side effect: every time you touched your head, you would leave a ghostly white fingerprint. If you hugged someone while wearing black, you'd leave your mark like a Victorian specter. Wigs and hairpieces were all the rage. If your hair was thinning, or if you just wanted to keep up with the towering hairdos of the day, you'd buy a switch or a rat. The rat isn't a rodent. It's a pad made from your own shed hair, collected from brushes and carefully stored for months. You'd stuff it under your real hair to add volume. Some women collected so much hair over the years, it's rumored they could have assembled a spare daughter. And then there was the matter of scent. If your hair started to smell a bit musty, you had options. You could spritz on rose water, dab it with lavender oil, or go full herbalist and tuck sprigs of rosemary or thyme into your braids. If all else failed, you simply had to hope that everyone was too polite or too stuffed up from coal dust to mention it. Society expected you to be presentable, but presentable was a flexible term. You made peace with the flyaways, the hidden tangles, and the faint whiff of roast chicken. At the end of the day, your hair was less about perfection and more about perseverance. You wore it like a badge of endurance, pinned, powdered, perfumed, and proudly unwashed. So the next time you complain about a bad hair day, just remember, at least you're not leaving a trail of goose fat and rice flour wherever you go. For the Victorian woman, that was just part of the morning routine. Baths were an event. Maybe weekly, maybe monthly. Maybe I'll just use more perfume. Filling a tub required servants to haul buckets of water, heat it over a fire, and then awkwardly leave you alone with your existential dread. Most women just made do with a damp washcloth, a prayer, and a hope that nobody came too close. Let's set the scene. You in all your Victorian glory, contemplating a bath. Bathing in the full sense of the word isn't something you do to start the day. It's something you schedule in advance, like a doctor's visit or a royal coronation. The word routine just doesn't apply here. Ordeal is more accurate. The process would begin with you announcing your intentions, which would immediately put half the household into a mild panic. First, the water. There's no faucet, no magic tap. Instead, someone has to fetch bucket after bucket from the well or the pump. If you're lucky, you live in a house with a scullery maid or an over-enthusiastic younger sibling. If not, you're carrying those buckets yourself, and by the end of it, you're already sweaty enough to need another bath. The water is then poured into a great tin or wooden tub, which is often parked right in front of the kitchen fire. Privacy is a myth. Doors don't always latch, siblings wander through, and at least one cat insists on supervising. Next, the water has to be heated. This means stoking the fire, wrestling with coal or wood, and waiting and waiting. The result is a lukewarm bath at best, and a chilling plunge at worst. By the time you undress and step in, the water temperature is somewhere between a swamp and a forgotten teacup. You have to bathe quickly, not just to conserve modesty, but to avoid freezing to death. Soap, as always, is an adventure. It's a harsh, lye soap that strips both dirt and hope from your skin. Scented soaps are a rare luxury. Most likely, you're rubbing yourself down with a yellow bar that smells like disappointment and sheep. Victorian advice books encourage vigorous scrubbing, but most people interpret this as a quick dab to the ankles and wrists. After all, overwashing is said to weaken the constitution. There was a genuine suspicion that too much bathing opens up the pores and invites disease. Cleanliness may be next to godliness, but only if godliness is also skeptical about germs. Because of the ordeal, most people skipped the full bath and just opted for a sponge bath. This is exactly what it sounds like. You grab a damp cloth and you clean what's visible. Your underarms, face, hands, anywhere that's likely to peek out of your high-necked dress. Your legs, your back, and your feet are politely ignored unless it's absolutely necessary. For everything else, there's perfume and a heartfelt denial. On the rare occasion you do get a proper bath, there's the issue of what to do with the water. Victorian plumbing is not up to modern standards. You either bail it out bucket by bucket, or you dump it into the nearest garden bed, which promptly dies from shock. If your entire family shares the tub, and they do, the pecking order matters. Eldest first, then the siblings, then the family dog, then possibly a neighbor if they've brought cake. By the end, the water resembles a tea brewed from socks. Public bathhouses existed, but they were suspect, rumored to be sites of gossip, scandal, and disease. The truly desperate or cosmopolitan might venture in, but most Victorian women avoided the risk. A reputation, after all, is harder to scrub clean than ankles. So, when you read historical novels describing ladies fresh from their bath, you should know that this is creative license at its finest. Most Victorian women made peace with their own gentle aroma and just hoped the lavender sachet pinned to their petticoat would pull its weight. When in doubt, don't. And if all else fails, stand upwind and smile. In Victorian England, the cleanest thing about you might just be your conscience. With everyone smelling like a combination of goat and mildew, Victorian women developed a love affair with perfume. You dab on rose water, violet, lavender, or straight-up musk, hoping to mask the truth. Instead, you'd end up marinating in a floral stew that was one sneeze away from a chemical incident. Let's be honest. In a world where laundry day is rare and bathing is reserved for the bold, perfume isn't a luxury. It's a defensive strategy. The perfume bottle isn't just a pretty accessory on your vanity. It is your most loyal companion, right up there with your fainting couch and a sturdy sense of denial. The goal is simple. You have to create a pleasant enough olfactory smokescreen that your own mother wouldn't recognize you by scent alone. The Victorian perfume arsenal was both vast and potent. You would start with floral waters, rose, lavender, orange blossom, each one promising to transport you to a lush English garden, far away from the actual English garden outside, which was full of manure and stray chickens. These delicate scents are dabbed on the wrists, the neck, and handkerchiefs, and then they're topped up throughout the day. For special occasions, there's attar of violets, or perhaps a touch of gardenia, making you smell like a bridal bouquet that's been left on the radiator. But as the day wears on and the city air thickens, the stakes get higher. Subtlety is abandoned in favor of raw power. Out come the heavy hitters: musk, ambergris, and civet. A trio so potent you could use them to fumigate an entire train carriage. Musk is technically derived from the glands of a musk deer. Ambergris is a mysterious waxy substance regurgitated by sperm whales, and civet comes from a small, angry cat-like animal with opinions about hygiene. If it sounds like something you'd find at the back of a mysterious drawer, you're on the right track. Layering was the secret weapon. A true Victorian scent wardrobe involved dabbing perfume behind the ears, on the chest, in the hair, and if you were feeling thorough, directly onto your handkerchief so you could wave it under your nose in moments of crisis. Some women would sew tiny sachets of dried herbs into their skirts, or pin scented ribbons inside their bodices. Anything to keep the world at bay. By the time you left the house, you had created your own personal ecosystem, rich with botanical diversity and possibly a few chemical hazards. Perfume wasn't just about personal use, either. Your entire environment got the aromatic treatment. Wardrobes were lined with lavender, rooms were spritzed with cologne, and letters were scented before sending so the recipient would think fondly of you, or at least know you tried. It was a scent arms race, and victory meant never being remembered as the one who smelled of boiled cabbage. Of course, not all perfumes were created equal. The finest scents were imported from France and cost as much as a month's rent. Cheaper options were concocted by local chemists using questionable alcohol, and whatever flowers survived the journey from the market. Sometimes a bottle would turn, and the wearer would be followed by a note of vinegar and regret. There are cautionary tales of women who mixed too many scents and fainted in church, or whose hair oil and perfume clashed so badly it started an argument at the dinner table. Perfume was also a powerful social signal. The right scent suggested refinement, wealth, and an enviable sense of restraint. The wrong scent, or too much of the right one, could signal desperation or worse, poor taste. There was an art to it, one perfected only through practice and occasionally some hard lessons. If someone handed you a lemon-scented handkerchief mid-conversation, you knew you'd overdone it. In the end, perfume was a daily gamble, a drop of elegance in a sea of uncertainty. You might walk through the world as a fragrant breeze, or as a walking cautionary tale. Either way, in Victorian England, the only thing thicker than the fog was the cloud of scent you left in your wake. And if all else fails, just remember in the battle against body odor, all is fair in love, war, and rose water. Toothpaste was more likely to be chalk, charcoal, or ground cuttlefish bone than anything minty fresh. Brushing was sporadic, mouthwash was a rumor, and dentists were to be avoided at all costs. Morning breath would linger all day, no matter how many times you gnawed on a licorice root. Let's be honest, Victorian dental care was less about shining smiles and more about crisis management. You'd wake up with the taste of defeat, and the first thing you'd do is reach for the toothbrush, if you even owned one. Most toothbrushes were little more than a carved stick with stiff boar hair, which after a few weeks was as inviting as brushing with a hedgehog. The bristles would fall out, the handle would splinter, and that suspicious black spot on your back molar. You'd name him Harold and pretend he's a birthmark. Toothpaste was an adventure of its own. Forget gentle whitening formulas. In Victorian England, the most common option was a gritty powder made of chalk, salt, baking soda, or if you were feeling bold, powdered charcoal. Sometimes someone would suggest crushed eggshells or cuttlefish bone, which worked about as well as scrubbing your mouth with a sandcastle. The rich might import mysterious dentifrices in little tins, often promising breath as fresh as a daisy, but delivering a flavor profile that was closer to burnt oyster. Mouthwash was barely a rumor. Some people tried rinsing with vinegar, lemon water, or straight gin, which explains a lot about Victorian poetry. But the most widespread treatment for bad breath was simply to chew something. Cloves, cardamom, anise, or licorice root. Anything to outmuscle the internal rot. Sometimes a sprig of mint would be pressed under the tongue before church or social calls. The effect was temporary and mostly psychological. If you talked too much, everyone knew. Dental work was, in a word, terrifying. There were no modern dentists, just barbers, blacksmiths, or the brave neighborhood tooth drawer. Their qualifications: a strong grip, a bottle of gin, and a high tolerance for screaming. Cavities were not filled. They were ignored until they became a public menace. Toothaches were treated with hot poultices, prayers, or if all else failed, extraction with pliers that had also seen duty on wagon wheels and sheep hooves. Losing a tooth was practically a rite of passage. By your mid-20s, you were probably missing at least a few. Smiling wide in Victorian England was less dazzling and more haunted doll collection. If you were wealthy and vain, you might invest in a partial denture, crafted from ivory, porcelain, or in a pinch, the teeth of the recently deceased. Nothing says romance like knowing you're kissing the ghost of someone's molar. Breath was another battlefield. The Victorian diet, lots of onions, cabbage, pickled fish, and tea, guaranteed that your exhalations could peel wallpaper. Morning breath is optimistic. This was more like lifelong breath. If you were going out, you'd keep a scented handkerchief handy, dabbing it to your lips and nose before starting a conversation. Social etiquette dictated that you didn't speak directly at someone's face, not out of politeness, but out of mercy. For courtship, things got even more complicated. Love letters were perfumed and poetic, but kisses were rare, and not just because of propriety. The risk of encountering a whiff of old cheese and panic was very real. Sometimes the anticipation of romance was sweeter than the experience itself, especially when halitosis became a third party. By the end of the day, your teeth would ache, your gums would be inflamed, and your tongue would feel like it's been sanded. You'd rinse with tepid water, hope for the best, and pray that science would one day invent mint. Until then, you'd flash your crooked smile, mumble your compliments, and keep your handkerchief close. Because in Victorian England, dental woes were as much a part of femininity as petticoats and perfume. If you could smile through the pain, you were already ahead. If you could laugh about it, you were a legend. You squeeze into a horse-drawn omnibus, pressed up against strangers in a cloud of collective misery. Every single jostle unleashes new aromas. Body odor, hair tonic, damp wool, and the unmistakable tang of someone who decided to eat pickled onions for breakfast. Let's set the mood. It's a chilly morning in Victorian London, and you have places you need to be. Walking is an option, but after a week of tramping over cobblestones in ankle-pinching boots, your feet are staging a full-blown mutiny. So you opt for the marvel of modern technology, public transport. The horse-drawn omnibus, a wooden box on wheels pulled by two very determined horses and powered by sheer optimism, promises efficiency and, at least in theory, a sense of community spirit. The reality is far less inspiring. You approach the stop and are greeted by a scrum of humanity. There's no queue, just a polite free-for-all. The vehicle itself is a rolling time capsule, its interior lined with well-worn, scratchy benches. The moment the door opens, you are swept inside on a tide of elbows, reticules, and the occasional live chicken. You find yourself wedged between a matron in 3 layers of shawl and a bearded man who appears to have confused his aftershave with turpentine. Personal space is a forgotten concept. You are pressed shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, thigh to thigh, breathing the shared air of a dozen fellow travelers. With every pothole, someone's hat lands in your lap, and you spend at least 5 minutes politely extracting a stranger's umbrella from your petticoats. The windows remain closed to keep out the London miasma, trapping every cough, sigh, and bodily vapor. If you're lucky, you have a seat. If not, you cling to the nearest strap, swaying with the rhythm of the city and praying your balance outlasts the horses. Then there's the issue of temperature. In winter, it's a mobile refrigerator, your nose pressed to the glass as your breath fogs up the pane. In summer, the heat rises like a tidal wave, intensifying the perfume of unwashed wool, cold smoke, and anxiety. The only breeze comes from the door swinging open at each stop, momentarily blessing you with cold air and cursing you with a fresh gust of city stench. A sensory buffet unfolds before you. To your right, a child sucks on a sticky peppermint, smearing it into the velvet upholstery. To your left, a gentleman reads his newspaper at full wingspan, elbowing you every time he turns the page. Somewhere at the back, a nervous lapdog is doing its best impression of a foghorn. The floor is a patchwork of dropped crumbs, muddy boot prints, and occasionally something suspiciously sticky. There is an unspoken etiquette to this chaos. Eye contact is avoided. Conversation is minimal. You may exchange a weary nod, a silent apology when your parasol jabs someone's ribs, or a quiet excuse me as you disembark. If someone sneezes, the entire vehicle stiffens. Each passenger delicately retrieving a scented handkerchief to cover their nose and mouth, half out of fear of contagion, half out of self-defense against the unleashed aroma. Fashion, of course, just makes things worse. Heavy dresses and endless petticoats trap heat, and woolen coats, never fully dry in the damp city air, add to the humidity. As you near your stop, the true challenge begins, exiting with grace. You rise, gather your skirt, and begin the delicate side step through the crush of bodies. Someone steps on your hem, a boot scrapes your ankle, and for one desperate moment, you are certain you'll never be free. But at last, you tumble onto the street, sweaty, breathless, and acutely aware of what everyone in London had for breakfast. In Victorian public transport, dignity is optional. But if you make it out with your hat, your handbag, and most of your personal scent intact, you can consider it a victory lap. A dozen people gather in a poorly ventilated salon, candles flickering and windows closed against the London smog. Perfume collides with perspiration, roast beef, and the faint whiff of coal smoke. You sip your tea, smile politely, and try not to pass out. The Victorian dinner party is the pinnacle of social ambition, a chance to display your best manners, your finest gown, and most importantly, your ability to remain upright in a room thick enough to butter. You receive the invitation with both excitement and dread. On one hand, it's a break from your routine of staring at the wallpaper and listening to the grandfather clock. On the other, it's a high-stakes test of personal endurance, olfactory resilience, and the sheer strength of your corset. Preparations begin hours before dusk. You squeeze yourself into your most extravagant dress, complete with all available underpinnings, a hastily pinned sprig of lavender, a cloud of face powder, and a heroic amount of hair pomade. This ensures that you're ready for anything, except perhaps direct sunlight. You arrive breathless to find the front hall already buzzing with anticipation and the first hints of the evening's signature scent. It's a swirling blend of overcooked cabbage, tallow candles, nervous sweat, and the sharp tang of someone's experimental cologne. You hand off your cloak to a harried servant, say a silent prayer for ventilation, and brace yourself for a few hours of social acrobatics. The drawing room is a sea of stiff-backed chairs, upholstered in fabrics that have absorbed a century of family secrets, and equally pungent dinners. The windows are shut tightly, both to preserve warmth and to keep out the legendary London fog. The host makes introductions, each handshake a mini challenge to identify the faintest notes of cheese, mutton, or mothballs. Small talk is both an art and a survival tactic. You comment on the weather, on the Queen's latest portrait, and on the tragic state of the neighbor's begonias, all while tactically maneuvering yourself closer to the sideboard where the air is slightly more breathable. The room, already stuffy, grows even closer as guests settle into their seats and the candles multiply. Candlelight flatters the complexion, but it does nothing for the air quality. Dinner is announced with the clang of a gong and a wave of both anticipation and dread. You shuffle into the dining room, a place of beauty, grandeur, and highly questionable ventilation. The meal is a marathon, with course after course parading past. Boiled beef, game pie, jellied eels, and the always suspicious blancmange. Every new dish brings a new wave of scent to join the ever-expanding cloud. By dessert, the air is sweet, heavy, and not entirely safe. Throughout it all, you are expected to maintain perfect posture. You dab at your brow with a lace handkerchief and try not to dwell on the knowledge that every inch of your dress, your chair, and your very soul is slowly absorbing the room's atmosphere like a tragic sponge. As the evening stretches on, you yearn for escape, for a breath of fresh air, or even the faintly moldy stairwell. but leaving early is the height of rudeness, so you endure. When the clock finally strikes the magic hour, you rise, thank your host, and make your way to the hall, only slightly dizzy from the combined effects of perfume, pastry, and suppressed panic. Finally, you step outside, gulp the cold night air, and realize you have survived another Victorian dinner party. Your underthings are expensive, hard to wash, and never quite dry. The unofficial rule is to wear them as long as you can, then flip them inside out, then air them under the pillow. Some people might say you should change them once a week, but others would call that reckless extravagance. Victorian underwear is not designed for comfort or for convenience. It's more of an endurance sport, a delicate calculation that involves fabric rationing, your social reputation, and the unforgiving rhythms of laundry day. Unlike today's endless supply of seamless cotton briefs, your entire collection probably consists of 2 or 3 chemises and a couple pairs of drawers. If you're fortunate, the poor might have just one of each, handed down, patched, and mended so often that it's unclear which generation first wore them. Your day begins with a critical inspection. You hold your chemise up to the faint morning light, squinting at the stains. Is that just a shadow or something more sinister? A quick sniff test determines your next move. Sometimes you'll just shake out yesterday's drawers, declare them fresh enough, and soldier on. If you're in doubt, the old inside-out trick extends your laundry window. Victorian innovation at its finest. Laundry day is a whole ordeal, as we've already established. Washing your underthings means wrestling with boiling water, harsh soap, and a drying process that depends entirely on the weather, luck, and how much space you can steal by the kitchen fire. Airing them out is the common compromise. Chemises are draped over chairs or tucked beneath pillows, allowing them to breathe overnight. Whether this actually improves the scent or just distributes it more evenly is up for debate. Society's expectations aren't exactly clear on the matter. Etiquette books offer vague suggestions, typically written by women who have never had to scrub a petticoat. They say to change as often as cleanliness and comfort dictate, carefully sidestepping the hard math of just how often that should be. Some declare that once or twice a week is respectable. Others, more ambitious or perhaps more optimistic, argue for daily changes, a notion that draws laughter in households where the family wash is a monthly trial by soap and steam. Hygiene is one thing, but your reputation is another. It's a poorly kept secret that changing your underwear too frequently is considered almost suspicious, a sign that you are either ill or uncommonly fussy. Nobody wants to be the talk of the neighborhood for overwashing. In contrast, not changing often enough risks offending not just your own nose, but anyone unlucky enough to catch a whiff when you climb the stairs ahead of them. For those blessed with a lady's maid, the dilemma is slightly eased. Maids take responsibility for discreetly laundering, mending, and managing the delicate rotation. The fabric itself is part of the puzzle. Fine cotton and linen are softer and theoretically easier to wash, but rougher fabrics hold on to every scent and stain like they're family heirlooms. Over time, even the best cared for chemise will develop a certain patina, an ode to Victorian life that is impervious to all but the most aggressive lye soap. Scented sachets, sprigs of lavender, and generous dabs of rose water are deployed in desperation, but the effect is fleeting at best. At the end of the week, you look at your one pair of drawers you haven't worn yet, and you calculate, is today the day, or can you push it just a little further? Victorian women are expected to be the delicate flowers of society, but nobody ever mentions the greenhouse conditions that exist under all those petticoats. You perspire quietly, clutching a handkerchief, and you pretend that fainting is due to excitement, not dehydration and the toxic cloud that's brewing in your boots. Society's vision of feminine delicacy is precise and unwavering. You're supposed to glide rather than walk, speak in gentle tones, and always appear perfectly serene. The prevailing belief is that women are fragile, more vulnerable to the vapors, swoons, and sudden attacks of genteel dizziness. But the real daily struggle isn't fending off existential unease. It's managing the very practical problem of existing in a 12-layer sandwich of wool, cotton, and social expectation. The irony, of course, is that the more delicate you're meant to appear, the less delicate your life actually is. Your wardrobe alone weighs as much as a well-fed toddler, and it traps heat and sweat with ruthless efficiency. By mid-morning, your chemise has turned into a personal steam room, and the corset is squeezing out moisture you didn't even know you could produce. Your petticoats become damp blankets, clinging stubbornly as you circulate through the parlor and kitchen alike. Direct conversation about these bodily realities is strictly taboo. You are never to mention sweat, chafing, or heaven forbid, body odor. If you need to freshen up, it's done with extreme subtlety. A dab of lavender water to the wrists, a discreet swipe of powder to the décolletage, a quick adjustment of your shawl to cover the spreading patch of underarm gloom. The rest is just stoic endurance. Every social interaction becomes a test of poise. Can you listen to Aunt Gertrude's stories about the Crimea while ignoring the waterfall that's happening under your bodice? The art of fainting becomes its own coping mechanism. A well-timed swoon provides not only the illusion of feminine frailty, but a rare chance to escape to a cooler, less crowded room. Sometimes, if you're lucky, even a brisk walk in the garden. Friends and relatives will flutter around you, blaming your excitement or a nervous disposition. You, meanwhile, are just grateful to be away from the soup kitchen atmosphere that exists beneath your dress. Foot care is another battlefield. The stockings, the boots, and the universal law that women's shoes must always be too small ensure that by the end of the day, your feet are swampy ecosystems unto themselves. Removing your boots is a private ritual that is best performed far from polite company and any open flames. Powder and perfume offer only fleeting protection against the sock-shaped cloud that rises from your toes. Even rest is a sweaty, sticky affair. Nightgowns are made of thick cotton, and beds are built for insulation, not ventilation. On warm nights, you toss and turn in a tangle of linen sheets, haunted by the lingering scent of rose water that's fighting a losing battle with reality. If you open a window, the risk of catching a chill sends your family into fits of panic. So you just have to settle for fanning yourself with an old letter and waiting for dawn. Yet through it all, you are expected to maintain an air of gentle dignity, never betraying your discomfort. The reward for your effort, the admiration of society, a reputation for grace, and if you're lucky, a brief moment alone with your feet in a bucket of cold water. Powder isn't just for your cheeks. It's for your chest, your armpits, and sometimes even your feet. Talcum, rice, and even ground starch are sprinkled everywhere to absorb moisture and, in theory, to kill odor. What actually happens is that you leave a trail of ghostly footprints and a fine dust on every velvet sofa you sit on. Step inside the Victorian powder room, not a bathroom in the modern sense, but a literal room or a corner or a repurposed cupboard where the tools of personal presentation are arranged like a miniature apothecary. On the table, you'll find ornate pots of powder, delicate puffs, and the subtle, lingering tension of everyone pretending not to notice what's really going on. Here, the battle against body moisture is waged in secrecy, with all the seriousness of a military campaign. The first weapon is the classic face powder, rice flour, zinc oxide, or if you're wealthy, the most fashionable French talc. A few gentle pats with a velvet puff, and your complexion is transformed into a flawless porcelain mask. But that's just the beginning. As the day heats up and your wardrobe becomes a woolen sauna, the need for more extensive powdering becomes apparent. Your face is only the tip of the iceberg. The real battleground is underneath. The armpits, the forbidden frontier. Society never mentions them, but every Victorian woman knows their perils. After your morning wash, that heroic dabbing of tepid water, you dry off and with furtive glances, reach for your secret stash of powder. A generous dusting beneath the arms, across the chest, and along the back of your neck. You may even sprinkle a little into your corset, praying it reaches the right places before it just melts away. Powder offers the illusion of dryness and a faint floral scent, but in truth, it's mostly wishful thinking. Your feet, too, require attention. After a day spent crammed into boots that were clearly designed by someone with a grudge against toes, your soles are crying out for relief. Out comes the powder box again. You dust your feet, your ankles, and even the inside of your stockings, creating a soft, powdery cocoon. The floor below your dressing table becomes a snowy drift, and every step you take leaves a white print, a subtle, ghostly calling card in the hallway. Of course, all this powder has consequences. By afternoon, your once elegant black skirt is dusted with mysterious white patches. Every time you sit down, a small cloud rises, settling on the upholstery and drifting into the sunlight. The household cat, if it ventures too close, emerges looking like it's been through a bakery explosion. And heaven help you if it rains. Powder and moisture combine into a sticky paste, leaving you feeling like a half-baked Victorian pastry. Despite the mess, powdering is as much about ritual as it is about results. Ladies would gather in the powder room, exchanging tips and gossip as they reloaded their puffs. The more ambitious might blend their own scented concoctions with lavender, rose, and even hints of bergamot. For many, it was a comforting moment of privacy in a life that was otherwise lived in public scrutiny. There are, of course, rumors and warnings. London is a pungent tapestry of horse droppings, coal smoke, spilled beer, and raw sewage. You open a window for some fresh air, and you instantly regret it. You close the window, and you marinate in your own personal ecosystem. Let's take a stroll through Victorian London, shall we? It's a bright morning, well, bright for the city, meaning the sunlight has fought its way through several layers of coal, soot, fog, and civic resignation. You step out your front door, prepared for a gentle promenade, only to be walloped by the city's signature aroma. It's a complex blend of manure, mud, and the ghost of last night's fish pie. The source of this olfactory onslaught is everywhere. For starters, the streets are rivers of chaos, thick with traffic and even thicker with the evidence left by the city's estimated 300,000 horses. Every wagon, cab, and carriage contributes to the grand urban compost heap. If you're not dodging fresh piles, you're dodging yesterday's, which has now been churned into a muddy soup by countless boots. The Victorians did their best to clean up. Street sweepers were armed with brooms and heroic mustaches, but the battle was never truly won. As you walk, your boots collect a museum's worth of samples. You quickly learn to keep your skirts hoisted above your ankle, and you develop a delicate sidestep that's worthy of a ballet dancer. The street gutters run with all manner of filth, soapy gray water from laundresses, mysterious brown trickles from tenement drains, and the occasional blob of something that's best left unidentified. Sometimes a pale child with a bucket will chuck the contents of last night's chamber pot right into the street. If you're lucky, they'll shout, "Gardaloo." If not, you just learn the value of reflexes and quick prayers. And then there's the river. The Thames, the lifeblood and the waste bin of the city, winds through town, carrying with it the scents of every abattoir, brewery, and household for miles. In the summer, when the water is low and the sun is high, the great stink rises like a biblical warning. Those who can afford it flee to the countryside, while the rest just plug their noses, stuff their windowsills with lime, or become philosophical about breathing through their mouth. Shops and markets add to the sensory symphony. The fishmonger's stall announces itself from half a street away. Butchers and poulterers dangle their wares over wooden boards, every surface glistening with drippings and optimism. Flower sellers valiantly fight back with buckets of violets and roses, but even they know it's a losing battle. The smell of roasting chestnuts, fried eels, and baking bread drifts temptingly on the air, mingling with less appetizing notes from the nearby tannery or glue factory. Public spaces are not much better. Parks offer a brief reprieve, but the perfume of damp grass and trampled daisies is no match for the wind when it shifts and carries the scent of the city's refuse heap. Even the statues seem to grimace as they watch the endless parades of dogs, children, and dubious puddles pass by. On rainy days, the odors deepen and ferment. Every cobblestone becomes a petri dish, every alleyway a challenge to the strongest of stomachs. And what about home? You finally return, thinking you've escaped the sensory assault, only to realize that every step has tracked the city right back through your own front hall. Victorian skincare means cold cream, rose water, and maybe a dab of lard. Baths strip away your protective layer of grime, so most women avoid overwashing. Acne. That's just your pores screaming for mercy under a patina of powder and oil. Let's take a long, hard look in the looking glass. You, a proper Victorian woman, are expected to present flawless, milk-white skin, as smooth as porcelain and as pure as the Queen's own intentions. The reality is a little more textured. You wake up to discover your cheeks are suspiciously shining. Your forehead has taken on a sallow glow, and your chin is hosting a gathering of tiny, unwelcome guests. Dermatology as a concept is something for the distant, utopian future. For now, it's just you, your reflection, and a small army of homemade remedies. Your morning skincare starts with a brisk splash of cold water, supposedly to close the pores and invigorate the constitution. The water is usually hard and suspiciously gritty, but you tell yourself it's character building. Soap, when it's used, is harsh and handmade, smelling faintly of tallow, ashes, or that one time you tried to clean a chimney. Too much soap, the experts warn, will strip away not only the dirt, but also the essential oils that protect your face from miasmas. The translation is, if your skin feels vaguely slimy, you're doing it right. For cleansing, nothing beats cold cream. The stuff is an unctuous blend of animal fat, beeswax, and rose water. You smear it on thick, then gently wipe away the dirt, old powder, and whatever secrets the city air has left behind. Cold cream does its best to moisturize and cleanse, but it leaves a residue so glossy that sunlight can be blinding if you stand near a window. Still, it's considered the height of feminine elegance. For stubborn grime or the occasional mascara mishap, which is usually lamp black or a burnt match, a dab of olive oil, or if you're feeling rustic, plain old lard does the trick. After cleansing, you pat on some rose water or elderflower water. This is less about effectiveness and more about optimism. Victorian advertisements claim these waters will refine the skin and banish all redness. In practice, they just leave you smelling faintly of tea cakes and garden parties. Still, you dab it on dutifully, sometimes with a soft cloth, sometimes with whatever's handy. Moisturizer, as we know it, doesn't exist, but the cold cream doubles as a night mask. In the winter, when your cheeks are raw and your lips are peeling, you smear on a thick layer and you just hope for the best. On bad days, you might apply a compress of cucumber or potato slices and pray that the only people who see you are family and that they won't gossip. Powder comes next. Rice powder, or if you're adventurous, fine starch, is patted on to set the cold cream and absorb the day's mounting oil. This works briefly. By lunchtime, you're already sweating through your protective dusting, and your skin is starting to resemble a marbled cake, white, red, and slightly shiny. If you're attending a special event, a layer of zinc oxide will give you the luminous, slightly ghostly finish that was considered attractive at the time. If someone asks why you look like you're about to haunt a stately home, you simply raise an eyebrow and you quote the fashion magazines. Exercise is discouraged, lest you sweat in public and ruin your reputation. Instead, you take a brisk walk in your heavy skirts. You pray it doesn't rain, and you pretend you're just out for some air. The reality is that you're mostly out for a bit of a breeze and an excuse to not be inside with Aunt Margaret. In Victorian England, women's bodies are considered to be delicate machinery, easily thrown out of alignment by too much exertion, strong emotion, or even a stiff breeze. Doctors and etiquette books alike warn against strenuous activity. They were convinced that a woman's main responsibility was not to damage herself or, worse, perspire where someone might witness it. Your prescribed fitness routine. A gentle, dignified stroll around the garden or the park, ideally at a pace that is just above standing still. Of course, you're expected to dress for the occasion. There are no athleisure options, no trainers. Instead, you have to layer yourself in the full uniform. Corset, chemise, petticoats, stockings, boots, and a hat that is large enough to interfere with most of the local bird life. A shawl is draped for modesty, gloves for propriety, and a parasol to defend your complexion against any rogue rays of sun. You step out looking less like an athlete and more like a well-decorated sofa on parade. The constitutional walk is supposed to refresh both your mind and your body. In practice, you shuffle along gravel paths, trying to avoid mud, puddles, and the ever-present city refuse. If you're in the country, you're dodging chickens, sheep, and the local goose who regards your skirts as a personal threat. Your gait is short and precise, because too long strides risk scandalizing the neighbors or tripping over your own hem. And heaven forbid you walk briskly enough to actually breathe hard. If your cheeks flush, someone will clutch their pearls and rush to fetch the smelling salts. Sweat is the enemy. To glisten in polite society is to court disaster. Handkerchiefs are kept at the ready for a discreet dab at the temples, but the real goal is to look as cool as a cucumber, no matter how many layers you're sweating through beneath your respectable exterior. Indoor exercise options do exist, but they are equally restrained. Calisthenics, gentle stretching, light arm waving, possibly touching your toes if nobody's watching, are all performed in private, ideally behind closed curtains with a window cracked for just a bit of air. Some households invest in dumbbells, which look suspiciously like small paperweights, and they encourage you to lift them daintily 10 times before calling it a day. Jumping, running, or anything that might jar your constitution is frowned upon. The only women who ride bicycles are French, scandalous, or both. For most, the closest you come to real exertion is dancing. Ballroom events are the hidden gems of Victorian society. Endless waltzes, reels, and quadrilles are performed in hot, crowded parlors. After 3 sets, your feet are throbbing and your chemise is quietly damp, but you maintain the illusion of effortless grace. If intimacy is a minefield, you're never truly clean, and neither is your partner. If you're lucky, the heady blend of floral water and wool masks the worst of it. If you're not, every romantic moment is underscored by the question, is that me or is that you? The Victorian boudoir, supposedly a sanctuary of romance and passion, has its own unique scent profile. Candles flicker, heavy drapes block out the street, and somewhere beneath the covers, the combined aroma of the day's efforts drifts between you and your partner. Scented sachets are stashed under the pillows. Rose water is dabbed on the wrists, and yet the lingering whiff of old laundry and cold smoke is never far away. Nothing says desire like the faint reminder of boiled cabbage. There's a certain choreography to Victorian intimacy. Undressing is a long, awkward process involving untold layers of hooks, buttons, laces, and social anxiety. Each layer peels away another stratum of the day's accumulated sweat. By the time you actually reach skin, you're both exhausted, slightly tangled, and wondering if you should have just skipped straight to reading poetry. No one talks about this part in the etiquette books, of course. Passion is always described in euphemisms: shared affection, tender embraces, glowing cheeks. The reality is slightly damper. Victorian bedrooms are rarely heated after sunset, so both of you rush through undressing, seeking the warmest spot in a cold bed. Blankets are piled high to ward off chills, but they also trap in every possible scent. There's a reason most couples slept in separate beds, or at least kept a respectful distance until the last possible moment. But for all the discomfort, there's a surprising tenderness in these stolen moments. Couples who are well versed in each other's flaws and fragrances find humor in their shared predicament. You develop a secret language: raised eyebrows, shared glances, a quick spritz of lavender behind the knee. There's a solidarity in mutual imperfection, and a sort of romance in the knowledge that nobody is fresh, but everyone is trying. The practicalities of love are endlessly creative. If you're feeling particularly optimistic, you'll take a quick sponge bath, or you'll change into the cleanest nightgown available. But mostly, you just have to rely on optimism and proximity. Sometimes you keep your stockings on for warmth. Sometimes your partner does too. A kiss is sweet, but it's always tinged with the lingering taste of licorice root or last night's wine. The morning after, you greet the new day with a mixture of fondness and dread. You discreetly check which side of the bed has absorbed more of the night's humidity. You reach for your perfume bottle, hopping to freshen the air before anyone else wakes up. If all else fails, you open the window just a crack, and you claim you simply adore the bracing morning air. Pregnancy and childbirth are heroic, messy, and fragrant in all the wrong ways. Hygiene during nursing is minimal. You just try to keep the baby alive, and you hope your natural musk isn't a fire hazard. From the first flutter of morning sickness to the last groggy hour of a sleepless night, a Victorian mother's journey is steeped in scent and sacrifice. The culture of the era treats pregnancy with both awe and a healthy dose of denial. Nobody says the word pregnant out loud. Instead, you are in a delicate condition, a phrase that is as vague as it is hopeful. Your changing body is to be admired, so long as it isn't actually discussed. The day of birth arrives with a flurry of activity. Midwives, nervous family members, the neighbor who thinks she's an expert, and possibly a doctor if you're lucky or unlucky. Victorian medical intervention was sometimes worse than no intervention at all. The birthing room is stifling, with every window shut tight against dangerous drafts. Sheets, towels, and every available rag are pressed into service. Scented posies or vinegar-soaked cloths are waved about, both as a defense against the air and as a distraction from the situation's less poetic details. Pain relief is minimal, mostly consisting of brandy, prayer, or biting down on the edge of the nearest pillow. The labor itself is long, it's noisy, and it is never, ever dainty. Afterwards, there's a sense of triumph and exhaustion, but there's also a fair amount of cleanup. There is no running water, no sterile gauze, and precious few towels. The room smells of sweat, of tears, and the sharp tang of iron, overlaid by whatever lavender water is within reach. It's a scent that lingers on the sheets, on the skin, and in your memory. Then comes the even messier work, nursing. In theory, it's the most natural thing in the world. In practice, it's round-the-clock feeding, soothing, changing, and praying the baby is actually attached to the correct part of your anatomy. Victorian baby books recommend frequent washing, but what they mean is wiping the baby down with a damp cloth, since real baths are considered dangerous for fragile infants and overexertion for mothers. Baby clothes and swaddling are rarely more than slightly damp. Linens pile up, but laundry is still a monumental task, so sometimes you just hang things by the window and you hope for the best. Nursing is not a private affair. The baby is always with you, day and night, under shawls, inside carriages, or tucked into a makeshift cradle at your feet. The world smells of sour milk, damp cotton, and whatever you last had for lunch. Modesty is prized, but so is survival. You simply hope you can keep your child fed and dry, and that your visitors are too polite to mention the wet patch that's spreading across your bodice. Illness is a constant threat, and every cough, fever, or strange rash is a source of terror. Remedies range from herbal teas to whispered superstitions. If you're very lucky, you have a helpful mother-in-law. If you're less lucky, she's just there to point out everything you're doing wrong. Through it all, the unique blend of mother and baby lingers everywhere you go. July arrives, bringing with it a heat wave and no escape. The windows stay closed against the bad air. Fans are hand-powered, and every surface is sticky with humidity and old perfume. You fantasize about swimming in the Thames, and then you remember what's actually floating in it. Summertime in Victorian England is less a season of leisure and more an endurance sport with extra sweating. The sun beats down through grimy panes, baking the city's bricks and boiling its citizens in their layers of wool. The scientific consensus of the era holds that fresh air, especially in cities, is just a fancy name for poison. So the safest choice is to seal up every window and hunker down. It's a sauna, but with more lace. You wake up already sticky, your nightgown glued to your skin. You roll over and discover the sheets have adopted your personal aroma, equal parts lavender, talcum, and a dash of regret. Venturing out of bed, your feet slap against floorboards that are somehow both hot and clammy. You throw open a window, only to be bombarded by the scent of horses, rotting vegetables, and on a lucky day, a faint whiff of someone's failed attempt at fish pie. You slam it shut, and you reach for your trusty hand fan, the Victorian answer to climate control. Dressing for the heat is a challenge with no winning strategy. Summer fashion demands full petticoats, a high-necked blouse, and of course, a corset. Sheer cotton is permitted, but only in colors that will show every single drop of perspiration. You dream of shedding a layer or two, but public decency and family pride have other ideas. You might swap your winter mantle for a lighter shawl, but anything more radical would cause a neighborhood scandal. Once you're dressed, you begin the day's main activity, seeking shade and pretending to enjoy it. The parlor curtains are drawn tight, trapping the heat and making the house as dark as a coal cellar. You drift between rooms with a limp handkerchief and the hope that the next corner will be cooler. Outdoors is no better. The air shimmers above the cobblestones. Ladies walk slowly, their parasols angled against the blazing sun, their faces flushed, and their eyes desperate for any hint of a breeze. The city's horses, too, trudge through the heat, occasionally stopping to nap in their own personal puddles. Hydration is a game of chance. Water is suspicious at the best of times, and in the summer, it's considered positively reckless. The alternative is warm lemonade, weak beer, or the perpetual cup of tepid tea, all of which leave you thirstier than when you started. If you're especially daring, you might risk a lemonade sold from a street cart, and you just have to pray you don't see what's actually floating in the pitcher. Evenings promise very little relief. The bedrooms are stuffy, the pillows are sticky, and the household's collective sighs do nothing to move the air. A wet cloth on your forehead and a cold foot bath are the closest you'll get to luxury. Fans are either hand-powered or, if you're truly fancy, a small clockwork contraption that clicks along until it jams, forcing you to start all over. Of course, your maid knows all your secrets. The foot powder in your shoes, the rose water in your drawers, and that one time you tried to bathe with gin because it was medicinal. She's seen and smelled it all, and she's still too polite to mention the sock full of lavender that's under your mattress. In Victorian society, a lady's maid is the silent witness to every moment of dignity and desperation. While the novels might paint her as a background character, the reality is that she's the real power in your private world. The lady's maid is part confidant, part fixer, and part damage control specialist. Her job is to make sure you appear effortless and unruffled, even when chaos is reigning just below the surface. Your morning begins not with sunlight, but with the gentle tap-tap at your door. She enters carrying a tray with tea, a crust of bread, and maybe a sly smile. She knows if you had a sleepless night. She's seen you sleep through a thunderstorm or wake at the first hint of rain on the window. She's the only one who can tell by the state of your nightgown exactly how humid it was under all those blankets. When it's time to get dressed, she lays out your underthings with the precision of a surgeon. She knows which chemise you prefer for less strenuous days, and which drawers can go another round in public. She's an expert in the inside-out trick and the strategic application of rose water to the truly dire areas. No stain is a surprise, no seam too delicate for her needle. You might catch her sometimes, quietly sniffing a petticoat before she hands it over to you. Not to judge, but to gauge whether today will require extra perfume or just another sachet pinned to your bodice. If you're feeling adventurous, she's your accomplice. Remember the night you read about gin baths in a women's magazine and insisted on trying it. She filled the tub. She looked the other way as you waded in, and she later aired out the towels until the house no longer smelled like a distillery. When you tried dry shampooing with rice flour, she's the one who swept up the white trails across the rug. She is discreet about all of your efforts, even when your hair powder mixes with sweat and leaves a chalky outline on the settee. Her real superpower is crisis management. A spilled cup of tea, a broken lace, a sudden heat wave. She has a plan for every single disaster. When summer arrives, she rotates your dresses on the line to keep the sunniest, freshest option up front. In the winter, she knows exactly how to warm a corset by the fire before lacing you in. She is the architect behind every successful escape from a dinner party gone wrong. And she's the last line of defense against a particularly judgmental aunt. Your maid is a vault of secrets. She knows which relatives you avoid, which bonnets pinch, and which boots have finally surrendered to the London mud. She keeps your confidences and your letters safe, never breathing a word of the time you tripped on your own petticoat and landed in the coal scuttle. If she's ever tempted to laugh, she saves it for the kitchen, far from polite society. In exchange, you offer small kindnesses. Victorian medicine prescribes all manner of freshening routines, from vinegar sponging to patent deodorants made with mercury. None of them really work, and some of them actively make things worse, but at least you can say you tried. Every era has its health fads, but the Victorians take it to new, dizzying, and sometimes toxic heights. Cleanliness, never quite attainable, becomes an obsession. In a world where full baths are a logistical nightmare, and the city itself smells like a stable. Enter the age of creative solutions. Potions, powders, tonics, and tinctures, most of which promise the scent of angels but deliver the aroma of regret. Let's start with vinegar. If you can't bathe, you can at least refresh your body by wiping it down with diluted vinegar. This sharp, nose-wrinkling routine is touted as a cure-all, cleansing, deodorizing, and apparently capable of keeping the plague at bay. Your skin is left tingling, red, and faintly reminiscent of a salad. Braver souls might add a few drops of lavender or rose oil, hopping to mask the vinegar's bite. It never works. Instead, you drift through the day in a cloud of eau de pickle, convinced you're the pinnacle of modern hygiene. Not satisfied, there's always the next new thing. By mid-century, deodorant makes its dubious debut in the form of powders, creams, and patent liquids, with ingredients you can barely pronounce. Some feature zinc or alum, which might actually absorb sweat. Others are based on camphor, which promises to purify the air around you. A select and unfortunate few are laced with lead, mercury, or arsenic. These were said to whiten the skin, banish blemishes, and after prolonged use, reduce the need for deodorant altogether by killing you softly, one dab at a time. Perfumers jump into the fray with a dazzling array of colognes and scented waters. Most are gentle, rose, violet, citrus. Others are so strong that one splash could clear a dinner party or empty a tram car. Patent medicines and apothecaries push aromatic spirits for internal use, meaning you actually drink the stuff. The instructions claim you'll smell like a bouquet. The reality is closer to juniper-scented regret with notes of nausea. Not all fads involve chemicals. There's the dry brushing craze, where you scrub your skin with a stiff brush until you glow, or at least until you're too tired to care about the sweat. Sea salt washes are recommended for robust constitutions, but most people, after a single freezing experience, quietly return to their vinegar and prayer. If you're desperate enough, you might even try the smoky room cleanse, where you sit in a closed space filled with burning herbs, supposedly to fumigate away your body odor. Spoiler alert, you only succeed in smelling like an overcooked ham. Health magazines and etiquette books are full of hopeful advice. Rub your armpits with lemon, sleep with fresh herbs under your pillow, or take cold air baths by standing naked next to an open window, as long as the neighbors can't see. The result is always the same: temporary relief and a sense of accomplishment, followed by the return of the inevitable Victorian musk. Yet even as these fads fizzle, you cling to them because hope springs eternal. Everyone smells, but no one ever mentions it. Instead, society invents a language of delicate hints, a sudden flurry of fans, an open window, or an aggressive offering of a nosegay. If someone offers you a lemon-scented handkerchief, it's time to panic. Victorian England is a place where your reputation is everything, and nowhere is this more evident than in the subtle, silent war against body odor. While every home, street, and drawing room simmers with an unspoken aroma. Acknowledging this reality is absolutely unthinkable. After all, true decorum lies not in the absence of smell, but in the elaborate rituals that are designed to politely ignore it. The rules of this invisible game are learned early, and they are practiced daily. At social gatherings, the opening of a window is performed with dramatic nonchalance. Someone will stand, stretch, and remark on how stuffy the air has become. If a breeze happens to clear the air, everyone will sigh with relief, grateful for the unspoken assistance. If the smell persists, the fans come out. Every lady flutters her lace-edged fan with rhythmic precision, sending coded signals across the parlor. An especially vigorous fan usually means that someone nearby has pushed the boundaries of acceptable freshness. Nosegays, which are small bouquets of fragrant flowers or herbs, are the essential social accessory. You clutch one to your nose at church, in carriages, or during particularly intimate conversations. A whiff of rosemary or a pinch of violet helps to filter the atmosphere and maintain the illusion that you're surrounded by blooms, not by fellow humans who are marinating in wool. Children are taught to hold their nosegays up for their health, but the adults know better. Sometimes the clues are more direct. An attentive hostess might gently suggest a refreshment break, giving everyone an excuse to step outside and breathe freely, if only for a moment. If you're offered a handkerchief that's been sprinkled with cologne or citrus, you should consider it both a kindness and a warning. The lemon-scented hanky is the Victorian way of saying, I care about you, but I care more about my nose. If a friend gifts you a sachet or a tiny vial of eau de toilette, you should accept it graciously and start using it immediately. Conversation is equally coded. No one speaks of sweat or laundry, but euphemisms abound. The heavy weather is blamed for the close air, and city living is blamed for persistent scents. If someone refers to a person as robust, earthy, or fond of the outdoors, it's time to check your own armpits. Politeness sometimes extends to outright denial. If an unfortunate gust stirs up something truly unspeakable, everyone simply carries on, their eyes fixed on the middle distance, their faces serene. Even in the most cramped omnibus or at the most crowded tea party, a stiff upper lip is the order of the day. Discussing the matter would be more scandalous than the smell itself. The truly skilled social navigator anticipates the hazards. She chooses seats that are upwind. She carries 2 handkerchiefs, one for show and one for emergency, and she knows exactly how to time her arrival so she's never the first one into a musty room. When sending a love letter, you spritz it with your favorite perfume, hoping to enchant, not asphyxiate your beloved. But ink and lavender rarely play nicely together, and sometimes the envelope arrives smelling like a haunted apothecary. In an era before texting, emails, or even reliable telegraphs, the love letter reigns supreme. The Victorian world is a place of longing and delayed gratification. Romance moves at the pace of the Royal Mail, and patience is as vital as passion. Your letter is your voice, your presence, your best hope of making an impression without actually appearing in person. In all your fragrant, sweat-soaked glory. To stand out in a sea of pale blue notepaper, you turn to scent. Perfuming your letter is both an art and a gamble. A few drops of rose water, a careful dab of violet, or a touch of orange blossom are all meant to hint at your refinement and hint, ever so gently, at your personal allure. Too little, and your letter blends in with the bills and the bank drafts. Too much, and your paramour is left sneezing, their eyes watering, clutching at the scented memory of your affection. The process is delicate. First, you write the letter, pages of careful script, equal parts poetry and coded longing. You choose your words with care, hoping they'll survive the journey as elegantly as you sent them. Then comes the critical moment, the perfume. The trick is not to soak the paper, but to waft the scent nearby, perhaps by waving a scented handkerchief over the open envelope, or by tucking the pages briefly among the sachets in your lingerie drawer. Some ambitious souls will press the letter between sprigs of fresh herbs, or a single, perfect rose petal. But even the best laid plans can go awry. Victorian perfumes are potent, and they are not always well behaved. A rainy day or a slow carriage ride can turn your subtle scent into a runaway disaster. The ink blurs, the paper warps, and your delicate script may arrive streaked with evidence of your enthusiasm. If you're unlucky, the local postal clerk is treated to a surprise, opening his mailbag to the scent of wild flowers, or worse, a whiff of eau de musk and melancholy. Still, the perfumed letter remains the gold standard of romantic correspondence. For those who are too shy for bold declarations, the scent says what words cannot. I am thinking of you, I wish to be near you, or at the very least, I don't smell like pickled onions. Lovers would exchange letters laced with meaning, both written and aromatic. Some even collected the best-smelling missives, hiding them in secret boxes or pressing them between the pages of a diary. Sometimes, though, the effort would backfire. An unlucky suitor might receive a letter that was so powerfully perfumed it cleared the parlor. Friends and family would speculate about the sender. Too bold, says Aunt Edith, fanning herself. Too desperate, sniffs Cousin James. But your beloved may be more forgiving. A scented letter is proof of effort, creativity, and maybe just a bit of mischief. A rare personal touch in a world of cold etiquette. Of course, some people took things too far, smuggling entire lemon peels or sachets of dried lavender inside their correspondence. The postman learns to fear your handwriting, but love, as ever, is a risk worth taking. Even in death, the scents linger. Victorian mourning customs involve layers of black wool, months of not bathing, and enough camphor to kill a small horse. Paying your respects means surviving both the grief and the miasma that's rising from the parlor. Death in Victorian England is not the quiet, sanitized event it tries to be today. It is a grand, public, and deeply aromatic affair. When a family member passes, everything in the house changes. The curtains are drawn, The clocks are stopped, the mirrors are covered, and black crepe is hung from every available surface. But the real transformation comes with the smell. Mourning, after all, is not just an emotional process, it's a sensory one. First, there's the body itself. Embalming is not yet common for most families, and refrigeration is but a scientist's daydream. The dearly departed is laid out in the best parlor, surrounded by flowers, candles, and well-meaning relatives. Scented posies, vinegar-soaked cloth, and generous handfuls of camphor are pressed into service. The theory is that these will mask the less poetic aspects of mortality. The reality is that they merely layer the air with the unmistakable note of floral panic. The mourners, meanwhile, are on a strict regimen. Black wool is the order of the day, heavy, heat-trapping, and almost impossible to wash without risking a full costume collapse. For widows, mourning can last a year or more, during which time bathing is discouraged. Water is thought to weaken the system during grief, and the only thing getting a regular wash is your lace handkerchief, which is occasionally soaked in cologne and pressed to your nose for self-defense. Mourning houses have their own particular bouquet, a cocktail of melting wax, old wool, musty upholstery, and the sharp tang of camphor, with the undercurrent of slow decay that no amount of rose water can fully erase. As friends and neighbors come to pay their respects, the windows stay shut for a combination of privacy and tradition. The result is an indoor climate that could best be described as historically preserved. If you attend a funeral, you'll find yourself in a sea of black, surrounded by people who are sweating gently into their crepe veils. Every movement raises a cloud of dust, powder, and nostalgia. Muffled sobs and the shuffling of boots mix with the low, ever-present hum of discomfort. Everyone keeps a handkerchief handy, not just for tears, but for an emergency sniff if the parlor gets too oppressive. You soon discover why no one lingers longer than is necessary. For those left behind, the duties of mourning continue. Clothes are brushed and aired, but they are rarely washed. Widows are expected to sleep with a lock of the deceased's hair under their pillow. They're also expected to wear mourning jewelry, which is sometimes made from the departed's actual hair, preserved and woven into brooches or rings. You develop a unique nostalgia for the living, hoping the next time you see them. It won't be over a pot of camphor. Gradually, as the months pass, the black clothing gives way to gray, then lavender, and the house is aired out at last. Yet the sense of loss lingers, woven into the carpets, caught in the folds of clothing, and imprinted on your memory itself. At the dawn of the 20th century, new inventions begin to change everything. Antiperspirant, mass-produced soap, and the shocking idea that maybe you should bathe more than once a fortnight. Hope is in the air, and so is the sweet scent of progress. Imagine, after a lifetime of powder, vinegar wipes, and desperate fanning, waking up to an advertisement for Odorono, the world's first commercial antiperspirant. It promises a life that is free from underarm anxiety and only occasionally gives you a rash. Early formulas may have been a bit caustic, But for those who were haunted by the family petticoat, this was nothing short of miraculous. Soap itself transforms, too. It's no longer a precious, crumbly block of lye and fat, but a mass-produced, perfumed marvel. Lifebuoy, Pears, and Sunlight soaps appear on grocers' shelves, smelling less like a candle and more like a meadow after a rain. For the first time, you can actually afford to wash all of your clothes and yourself, more than just for Christmas. Bathing becomes a fashionable weekly routine, then twice a week, then, imagine, every single day. Victorian grandmothers are horrified. The younger generation can finally tell the difference between their uncles and the family dog by scent alone. Bathrooms themselves get a makeover. Indoor plumbing creeps from the houses of the wealthy into the burgeoning middle class. Running water, flush toilets, and hot taps mean that the old routine of hauling buckets from the well becomes a thing of the past, remembered with nostalgia only by those who never had to do it. The family bathtub moves from the kitchen to a tiled sanctuary of its own. Entire industries spring up around personal hygiene, from shampoos to scented powders to the radical innovation of toilet water. And that's not for the toilet, but for you. Perfume evolves too. Instead of hurling musk, civet, and whale bath at unsuspecting relatives, chemists start using synthetic ingredients. Fragrance is no longer just a weapon, it's a pleasure. You can smell like violets, like fresh linen, or like the imaginary hills of Provence. For the first time, choosing your scent becomes an act of self-expression, not self-defense. Fashion follows suit. Corsets are slowly replaced by more breathable undergarments, allowing women to sweat. And this is the dream, even move without the constant threat of fainting. Lighter fabrics, machine-washable cotton, and shorter hemlines mean that the body finally gets to meet the breeze, not just the laundry line. Advertisements boast of freshness and cleanliness in bold type, promising a future where you can run for a tram without being mistaken for a cheese wheel. Social rituals adapt too. The nosegay retires to the history books, and handkerchiefs are embroidered for beauty, not just for battle. Dinner parties benefit from open windows and, eventually, electric fans. Etiquette columns begin to address how to keep fresh in the summer, not how to look serene while you're melting. But perhaps the biggest change is psychological. Cleanliness ceases to be just a virtue or an impossible ideal. It becomes, quite simply, normal. People live longer, they feel better, and for the first time in history, they can afford to be a little bit smug about how often they bathe. You never leave home without your trusty nosegay, a tiny bouquet of fragrant flowers, herbs, or in desperate times, anything green you can find in the garden. Ostensibly a fashion accessory, it's really a mobile life raft against the onslaught of public odor. When a breeze shifts the wrong way, you raise your posy like a shield and you pretend it's just for show, not self-defense. Victorian England is a world that is saturated with smells, some of them charming, most of them alarming. Long before the invention of pocket-sized deodorant or the subtle miracle of a travel-sized body spray, the nosegay is your best hope. It is the original personal air purifier, except it's made from whatever you haven't yet eaten or boiled for soup. Housewives, children, and high society ladies alike can be seen clutching bunches of violet, rosemary, and mint with a grip that is more desperate than fashionable. Selecting your nosegay is a daily strategy session. You scan the kitchen garden for anything that's remotely fragrant. Lavender if it's in season, a sprig of thyme if you're feeling bold. On desperate days, even a bruised geranium leaf will do. Urban dwellers who are deprived of homegrown options buy tiny bouquets from flower sellers at street corners, sometimes with mysterious filler plants whose sole purpose is to overpower the smell of the fishmonger who is 2 stalls down. The nosegay is as much about etiquette as it is about comfort. The Victorians are experts at not mentioning the obvious. So if you need a moment to recover from a surprise wave of public transport aroma, you simply raise your flowers to your face and you breathe in discreetly. A practiced flutter of the wrist signals elegance, not panic. If the occasion is truly dire, you can bury your nose in the flowers and sigh deeply, feigning delight at the scent of crushed basil, while you're privately counting down the seconds to safety. There is a whole unspoken language to nosegays. Offering one to a friend is a subtle way of saying, "I care about your well-being and mine." Lovers might exchange special posies with hidden meanings. A carnation for fascination, rosemary for remembrance, lemon balm for "I hope you bathe before our next meeting." Even children are given small bunches to keep them healthy, which really just means to keep them from asking awkward questions about the smell on the omnibus. The fashion implications are not insignificant. Ladies' magazines offer tips on color coordination. Let your nosegay match your bonnet ribbons for maximum effect. Too much green is frowned upon, too little flower, and you risk being mistaken for someone who's just given up hope. Silver holders and filigree cones become coveted accessories, with wealthy women vying for the most elaborate design. A status symbol that doubles as a defensive weapon. Of course, nosegays are not infallible. On hot days, the flowers will wilt and the herbs will go limp, losing their potency by midday. Some especially robust city odors cannot be conquered by any amount of hyacinth. If you find yourself in a particularly pungent crowd, your only hope is to breathe through your mouth, hold your nosegay aloft like a talisman, and silently pray for a strong breeze. Still, for all their fragility, nosegays are the unsung heroes of Victorian social survival. Travel isn't glamorous. It's a slow, rattling nightmare in a stagecoach that's packed with other people, their luggage, and their unique olfactory contributions. The windows are stuck shut, everyone is sweating in their Sunday best, and the only thing more oppressive than the body heat is the stench of a half-eaten pie that's fermenting on the floorboards. Motion sickness actually becomes a mercy. You arrive at the coaching inn, full of naive optimism. Your bonnet is straight, your gloves are clean, and your ticket is clutched in a hopeful hand. 5 minutes later, your resolve melts like butter on a July afternoon. The stagecoach stands before you, creaking under its own history. Splintered benches, tired horses, and a driver who looks like he bathes once a season on a dare. Luggage is stacked precariously on top, threatening to crush any sense of personal space or optimism. You climb aboard, and you quickly realize that assigned seating is a myth. Instead, it's a scrum of elbows, trunks, and over-perfumed travelers, all jostling for a square foot of bench. You wedge yourself between a mustachioed gentleman who has apparently confused mothballs with cologne and a grandmother who is cradling a basket of onions. The air is already thick, a stew of old wool, hair tonic, damp boots, and someone's lunch that is slowly making its presence known. The doors slam shut, and with a lurch, you are off at the breathtaking speed of a brisk walk. The windows, which are supposedly for ventilation, are jammed tightly shut with age and disuse. The air grows warmer closer and more fragrant with each passing mile. Conversation is kept to a minimum, partly from politeness and partly from a desire to conserve what little oxygen remains. Every jolt of the coach sends a new wave of aromas wafting up from beneath the seats. Rotten apple cores, old newspapers, and the unmistakable hint of something long dead and better forgotten. Stagecoach travel is not for the faint of heart or the sensitive of nose. There are no rest stops, only the occasional roadside inn, where you and your fellow sufferers pour out, gasping, to stretch your cramped limbs and inhale the comparatively fresh smell of manure and fried fish. The break is brief, and soon you are herded back into the rolling oven. Your dress clings to you, a damp reminder that fashion and function parted ways a long time ago. Meals are their own adventure. Should you risk the cold pie that's offered by the innkeeper, or should you rely on the emergency biscuit that's stashed in your reticule? If you do eat, you just have to hope that it won't come back to haunt you when the coach hits a particularly bumpy patch. Motion sickness, which was once feared, becomes a friend. It's the promise of a few blissful, if queasy, moments when you no longer notice the smell. As the hours drag on, tempers begin to fray. Children whimper, gentlemen snore, and the grandmother's onions become the unofficial mascot of the journey. You pass the time by counting sheep out the window or inventing new words for unwashed. If you're lucky, you'll nap. If you're unlucky, your neighbor will, slumping gently onto your shoulder. Finally, after what feels like a week but was actually only 40 miles, you tumble out of the coach, your hair flattened and your dignity slightly wilted. Every household has its own secret weapon against odor, and it usually involves lemons, vinegar, and a faith that borders on delusion. You dab lemon peel behind your ears, you sprinkle vinegar on your linens, and sometimes you just wave a sprig of mint around the room while you mutter hopeful incantations. This is not a modern air freshener. The Victorian home is a living experiment in trial and error freshness. You can open a linen closet and you'll find little bags of dried lavender and rose petals tucked into every single corner, each one an act of olfactory optimism. Dried orange peel hangs from the mantelpiece, supposedly absorbing foul airs. Entire families swear by the cleansing power of fresh parsley, which is as effective at eliminating odor as it is at preventing heartbreak. So not very, but you never stop hopping. Lemon is the universal cure-all. You have a bad smell. Lemon. Stale air. Lemon. Aunt Mildred's socks are threatening to clear the room. Lemon. It's sliced thin, and it's left in strategic places. The zest is dabbed onto handkerchiefs and even rubbed on the family dog. If you have a little extra coin, you might invest in imported lemons, and you can proudly display them in a glass bowl. This is both a status symbol and a subtle warning to any passing odor that you mean business. Vinegar, sharp and assertive, is the secret sauce of the determined Victorian homemaker. Linens and underthings are soaked in it, chamber pots are rinsed with it, and stubborn patches of parlor gloom are attacked with a vinegar-soaked rag. Some even claim that sipping a spoonful will purify you from the inside out. Your mouth will pucker, your eyes will water, but you'll feel cleansed, at least until the next meal of pickled herring and boiled cabbage resets the cycle. Sachets and potpourri are the height of homemade sophistication. Gathered rose petals, cloves, cinnamon bark, and nutmeg are sewn into little muslin bags, and they're tucked into drawers, shoes, and in moments of real desperation, corsets. You might spend an entire afternoon boiling apples with cinnamon and declaring the resulting aroma to be better than Paris. If the house still smells, you simply add more sachets, and you hope that nobody notices the undertone of wet dog and despair. On a truly dire day, desperate times call for creative measures. Mint and rosemary are waved around like magic wands. Some households try simmering vinegar on the stove, which produces a heavy fog that drives both family and flies alike out into the garden. Charcoal pans are placed in musty rooms to draw out the miasmas, though their only real achievement is a thumbprint on every doorknob. Superstition mixes freely with science. Grandmothers will insist on hanging camphor balls near beds to ward off illness, while children are sent to bed with sprigs of thyme under their pillows. Some even put slices of bread on the mantelpiece, convinced that stale bread absorbs evil smells. It doesn't, but it does invite mice, which present their own olfactory challenges. And of course, hope springs eternal. Every new suggestion from the ladies' magazine is tested with breathless anticipation. If something seems to work, it is praised endlessly. If it fails, it's quietly forgotten, and life goes on, lemon-scented or not. Because in the Victorian household, there are as many home remedies as there are homes. During the Victorian period, menstrual care is creative. Rags are reused, they're laundered in cold water, and they're hung to dry behind a curtain with all the discretion of a marching band. Scented sachet and rose water do battle with biology, but everyone just pretends the situation doesn't exist. If you look pale at breakfast, people will blame your female nerves, not the fact that you spent all night strategizing how to minimize the collateral olfactory damage. For Victorian women, menstruation is the monthly event that must never be mentioned, acknowledged, or heaven forbid, discussed in public. If it must be referenced at all, it's under a thick fog of euphemism. The courses, the visitor, or simply a turn. You're expected to maintain a calm, delicate demeanor, even as you're quietly inventing new ways to survive what is, in reality, a recurring hygiene crisis. Let's start with the supplies. There are no disposable pads or tampons, no discreet plastic wrappers or perfumed wipes. Instead, you have to rely on homemade cloth rags. Soft if you're lucky, scratchy if you're not. These are folded, layered, and they're fastened with pins or they're tucked into drawstring undergarments. If you're especially fortunate, your mother or your older sister has a tried and tested method. Otherwise, you just have to improvise and you hope for the best. After they're used, the ritual of cleaning begins. The rags are soaked and they're scrubbed, often in cold water. Hot water is reserved for life and death matters, or the Lord's own laundry. Privacy is a luxury, so you wash and you hang your rags behind a curtain, under a bed, or near the stove, anywhere they might dry quickly and avoid the inquisitive noses of younger siblings, male relatives, or worst of all, the family dog. Odor management is a desperate, ongoing campaign. Sachets of lavender or dried rose petals are slipped into linen drawers, and sometimes even sewn directly into the undergarments. Rose water is dabbed liberally behind the ears, on the wrists, and in moments of real need across the lower belly. It's an aromatic Hail Mary that's meant to convince yourself and everyone else that nothing out of the ordinary is happening. Some women will chew parsley, believing it might sweeten their breath, and by some magical extension, all of their other bodily scents. Science is not consulted. Physical discomfort is treated with stoic silence, or the occasional lie down in a darkened room. If you're pale or peevish, it's just your nerves or the weather, it's never cramps. Hot water bottles do exist, but they are a rare luxury. Most women just settle for a folded flannel and a stiff upper lip. Should a stain appear, there is a mad dash to change chemises, to soak and scrub, and to pretend that nothing ever happened. Bloodstains are blamed on nosebleeds or a minor household accident. You become a master of plausible deniability. In social settings, you have to monitor your every move, crossing your legs, standing up slowly, checking the back of your skirt with subtle, acrobatic contortions. These are all second nature. The fear of a telltale spot or an errant odor is enough to make anyone faint, which is at least conveniently fashionable in Victorian society. Through it all, everyone maintains the fiction that nothing is amiss. Mothers will pass on whispered advice. Friends will exchange nervous glances and coded warnings. Dogs, cats, and the occasional caged bird roam freely through your Victorian home, adding their own signature scent to the family aroma. Wet dog mingles with hair oil, while cat boxes are tucked behind lace screens in the parlor. It's a delicate dance to outsmell the family spaniel, and honestly, some days you lose. Pets are the pride of many a Victorian household, symbols of status, affection, and occasionally chaos. The Queen herself is famously fond of her Pomeranians, and middle-class families follow suit. Every child begs for a kitten, every matron coos over a canary, and every self-respecting gentleman believes that a hound or two completes his home. But no etiquette book prepares you for the daily olfactory battles that are waged beneath your own roof. Let's begin with the dogs. They are everywhere, curled under chairs, stretched across hearthrugs, or standing sentinel at the front door. Rain or shine, they track the outside world inside, leaving trails of damp fur, muddy paw prints, and an aroma that lingers like an old scandal. After a walk, your spaniel will shake enthusiastically, sending a fine mist of Thames water and mystery across your upholstery. Attempts to towel them dry are met with squirming resistance, so most days you just have to accept that your settee will never smell like rose water again. Cats, meanwhile, conduct themselves with regal indifference. They curl in window seats, they nap on your freshly pressed linen, and they shed with the regularity of clockwork. Their facilities are tucked discreetly behind folding screens or underside tables, but their presence is known to every guest with a nose. You sprinkle fresh earth, scented herbs, and on desperate occasions, a scoop of coal ash, hopping to keep the worst of it at bay. Yet somehow, even the most fastidious feline can defeat your arsenal of powders and potpourri. The birds add their own piquant notes. The canary's cage is an ever-present fixture, chirping from the sunniest corner and sprinkling feathers and seed husks with abandon. Every so often, someone forgets to change the water, and the resulting scent reminds everyone that nature, even when it's caged, finds its way into the parlor. Then there are the less common pets, ferrets, hedgehogs, rabbits, all kept by children or eccentric uncles. They require boxes, baskets, or makeshift dens, and they offer an endless stream of bedding to launder, cages to scrub, and odors to neutralize. Your maid is forever trailing a cloth that's soaked in vinegar or lemon, waging a losing battle against the cumulative perfume of fur and feathers. Victorian solutions are creative, if not always effective. Sachets of lavender are hung from pet collars. Rose petals are scattered under chairs and woven into animal bedding. Some households experiment with cologne, much to the confusion of every dog in the district, while others resort to simply airing out the rooms and pretending the breeze is responsible for that mysterious musk. Of course, family life marches on. Children will sneak bits of roast under the table. Guests will pretend not to notice the paw prints on their gloves, and everyone learns to live with a little extra character in the air. Complaints are met with cheerful deflection. "Oh, that's just Jasper. He does so love a muddy walk." So tonight, as you tuck into your soft, fresh sheets and drift off in your clean, climate-controlled bedroom, maybe take a moment to thank the universe for hot showers, laundry detergent, and the modern miracle of deodorant. Because surviving Victorian womanhood wasn't just about dodging tight corsets or awkward dinner conversations. It was about waging a daily, invisible war against the world's most stubborn smells. You made it through the layers of wool, the weekly baths that barely counted, the marathon dinner parties that were held hostage by bad ventilation, and the relentless battle against your own petticoats. You endured public transport that was packed like a can of slightly damp sardines, and you learned to wield perfume, lemon peels, and nosegays like weapons in the great olfactory struggle of the 19th century. But the story of Victorian women is more than just suffering and sweat. It's a testament to the human spirit, our ability to survive, adapt, and even laugh in the face of discomfort. For every day spent in wool and agony, there was a night of whispered jokes, clandestine airing out sessions, and small acts of rebellion against the nose-blinding status quo. So let yourself relax, knowing that even in a world where everyone stank to high heaven, people still fell in love. They made art, they shared secrets, and they somehow just kept going. That's resilience in its weirdest, most fragrant form. Rest easy tonight, and maybe, just maybe, send up a little gratitude for soap, for fresh air, and for living in a world where your legacy won't be owed to regret. Because history may be a little gross and a lot ridiculous, but it's also proof that people, no matter the century, are remarkably stubborn, hopeful, and always looking for a way to smell just a little bit better. Good night.